Okay, first graders, you have been learning through this lesson about the color wheel. In kindergarten, you learned about the primary colors, and now we're adding some more colors that are made by what? By mixing two of those primary colors. And you took a little quiz already, hopefully, and this is just going to get us started. We're actually not going to finish this project, but we're going to do the color wheel portion. So on the supplies, I've got a piece of paper, I've got a pencil, and if you don't have an eraser, make sure you have one nearby just in case. And then something that you're going to be coloring with, whether it's markers, whether it's crayons, for this part of the project. And I've got my medium-sized circle tracer, which is just a lid that was, I don't know, to butter or something. Your medium size might be a little smaller. Your medium size might be a little bit bigger. You want to make sure that you are that it's going to fit on your paper and that it doesn't take up the entire paper, because we're not going to be done yet. Decide where you're going to put your remember all the artist decisions that we made in kindergarten. A lot of those are always the same. You're going to decide if you want your paper vertical or if you want your paper horizontal. It fits a little bit better this way for viewing purposes, but I kind of already know the rest of the project, so I'm going to go ahead and put mine this way, and I'm going to hold that circle tracer and I'm going to just go right around that outside edge. Okay. Now, you could use a ruler for the next step, but first graders don't always have a lot of practice with rulers. So I am just going to have we need 6 sections, okay? So we're going to go ahead and we're going to kind of find about the middle. All right, and we're going to draw a line through there. Now, don't get ahead of yourself. We're not doing this because that's only going to give us 4 sections. So the next 2 are going to be, it's going to make an X, okay, like this, across our circle. But you need to be careful because you don't want some sections too small and others huge, but it's okay if they're not exactly the same size. I like to kind of come over here and maybe make a couple of marks. And then I also like to make them on this other side, because if you do that, it gives you somewhere to connect to, okay? Just so and if you make your line nice and light, if you make a mistake and you need to redo it, you can. And we want kind of a center point. Now mine's not exactly in the center, but we're not going to worry too much about that. And then you can go back and you can darken up the line. Now, we are going to go ahead. Let's start out because we know our first colors. I'm going to go ahead and put my pencil down. I'm going to get out my markers because I'm going to use markers for this part. These sections are small enough that using markers is okay. And it doesn't matter where you put your primary colors, just so that you're not putting them next to each other. So we're going to go like every other one. I don't know if you guys have ever used these scented Mr. Sketch markers, but pretty sure this is supposed to smell like blueberries. It smells pretty good. So as always, I like to outline my shape first, like so. Okay, and then I go back and I color it in. And again, these shapes are small enough, but if you have crayons, if you have colored pencils, if you want to paint them, that's okay too, as long as you are making it look like a color wheel. And since you've already done your color quiz, really all we're going to do is get this color wheel on our paper. I'm going to be done with the blue for now, and I'm going to come back in. Now, in the future, we might do some color mixing, but for today, we're going to actually use those colors. So I'm going to, the secondary colors that is, outline for my red. Remember, not right next to, because of those colors that make it. Now, something else you could try, and you can't do this with markers, if you do decide to use paint and you want to mix your colors, you're going to always start with the lightest color first. So if I was going to mix a primary, I'll talk about that in a minute, I would always start with the lightest color first and then mix the little bit of darker paint. And then I'm going to skip a spot here, and my yellow is going to come right down here. So every other, so we've got our primary colors, and this is kind of where we let off talking about colors last year, even though you may have heard those secondary colors and now you know more about them because of what you've watched up until this point and what you've learned about. So I'm going to be done with my primaries. Now, here's where it gets interesting. And if you weren't using markers, markers don't mix very well, boys and girls. So you don't want to do this if you chose to use markers, but maybe you want to switch to crayons or something. And I want to show you what I mean by that. I'm going to get a red and maybe a yellow. And I'm going to kind of demonstrate to you what I mean by mixing. Now, crayons aren't as good to mix with, but you can. And there's always going to be a lighter color. So of these two, which one do you think is the lightest? Yes, you're right. It's the yellow. So I would come over here and I would go ahead now, because I'm mixing these two, which are going to make what color? What color, boys and girls? Orange. I need to put them between the two primary colors that make that color. So I'm going to go ahead. Now you can do this with paint as well. You can't do it with markers. You're going to mess up your markers. Markers are a different kind of material. Crayons will do it, not perfectly, but they will. So start with your lightest color, and you need to be careful with that darker color because you don't want it to take over. So I'm not going to press quite as hard, and I'm going to come in. Now, these aren't going to be perfect because that's not going to look just like orange, but I'm going to show you what I'm going to do. After I get some of this red on here over the top, I'm going to go back in and I'm going to even press a little bit harder on the top of that red with my yellow. So this is kind of a blending. It's not going to be perfect. It's not going to be as smooth, and it's not going to be a pure orange, but it will give you sort of that orange look. It's neither red or yellow. It's kind of in between. But if you don't want to try the color mixing, you don't like that look, you could just use your orange marker. So if I'm going to mix, I still need this, and I'm still going to need the red. I need to get a blue, and it doesn't matter what color blue. Try to get it kind of close maybe so it matches out. And of these two now, let's go with blue and red. Which one do you think is the lighter one? Red, but not quite as light as it would be if it were the yellow. So I'm going to go ahead and get my red. And here's the thing with the red crayons, and I think this is part of the problem and the reason that it doesn't look very orange, boys and girls. You know, these crayons are tricky because it looks red, but it's really a red violet color. So that's why it's not giving us a true orange look over here. And I'm going to come in with the blue on top. And visually, while you can see both the red and the blue, you know that, and your eyes are helping to kind of mix those colors together. Okay, so I'm going to come back again on the top and press a little harder with that kind of red. I should have made sure it was a true red. And you're getting kind of that purple look to it. It's not perfect purple, it's a mixed purple. All right, and then last but not least, we've got our two colors that are going to make the only color we don't have, which is our green. You can do this with paint. You would start with the lightest color, but if you're using paint, boys and girls, make sure when you add that darker color that you do not add too much of it, because darker colors, it does not take as much paint. Okay, and then I'm going to come in with my blue, and this is probably going to be the most successful because there's such a stark difference between blue and yellow. One is very light color and one's a much darker color. Red sort of falls in between those two, so you don't get quite the same effect. But I am still going to come back in with my yellow on the top, and I'm going to press down to help get that sort of green color. All right, I've got my color wheel, and we're going to continue more next week, so you don't want to lose this. Put it in a safe spot. Make sure you can find it for next week's class when we continue with this.